Lydia Lunch. Lydia is going to be bringing her Brutal Measures project all throughout the East Coast over the next couple of weeks. She's going to be making a stop here in Boston at the Massasoit Elks Lodge in Cambridge this Thursday, the 12th. The show is being presented by Boston Hassel. So, Lydia, I see that you recently returned from a tour of Europe. Tell me about that experience performing the new material for that audience.
Well, I'm chronically and constantly performing in Europe all kinds of things. But Weasel and I, with Brutal Measures, we did a big tour almost a year ago, I guess, and it was great. It's interesting to me because as opposed to like a rock band or my band Retrovirus, which I also tour with, this is different almost every night because, first of all, Weasel's improvising. And although I have certain text I'm doing, it's really up to my mood exactly what's going to go down. So it's a very live thing, and just drums and vocals. It's pretty active.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the improvisational nature of the performances. It seems like you and Walter just get up there, and I know that the recording is about 20 minutes long, but you could probably go on for even longer than that, just playing off of each other.
Well, we usually go on for about twice that long, and the recording that we did, it's just the piece was perfect as was, and so there you go. But yeah, it's a different. I mean, Weasel's been doing improv for decades. I wouldn't say that I'm an improvisational artist, but I like to scramble the script occasionally. So, sometimes it just depends on the mood. I mean, if you're playing rock songs, you're playing basically, X amount of songs, still fun, still bringing something to it. But in this format, it's a bit more challenging and therefore a bit exciting.
How long have you been playing with Weasel?
He volunteered for Retrovirus about 5 years ago, and then we just started doing Brutal Measures, I think, like last year, just as something different. And, as I like to say, we got to keep the hose on the dance floor.
Yeah.
Which does not mean anybody's going to be dancing to these numbers. I can tell you that right now. We're just both hyperactive. We both have a lot of projects going on always at once. And I created this actually kind of to give Weasel a break. But then he told me one time it was one of the hard. I'm like, how can this be one of the hardest things you've ever? You lead a 12-piece improvisational orchestra, but he's got to be thinking, constantly. Not that he's not always thinking, but I guess it's a challenge for him because when you're doing improvisational music with other musicians, you get into a groove or a sync, and this is more like a tag team thing. So that's interesting.
Is it a project that you had wanted to do for a long time with him?
I just came up with it last year, and so there we went. And here we go.
The new recording is available on lydialunch.bandcamp.com. I wanted to ask you about arriving in New York in the 70s amidst the scene that was going on at that time around CBGBs. Was your goal to form a band and become a part of what was going on there at that time?
No, my goal was to be a spoken word artist, but it didn't exist at that time because it was post-Lenny Bruce, post-Beat generation, post-Patti Smith rock and roll poetry, and pre-slam poetry, pre- Nuyorican Cafe, which was a big, word scene out of New York. So I went wanting to do spoken word, but it started my first band, Teenage Jesus, which bizarrely enough was half instrumental. Go figure that one out. Yeah. So, the no wave movement was really a rebellion against everything that had influenced us, and I like to define it by, it has more in common with surrealism or Dada than any other art movement because it was, in a sense, absurd. The situation was absurdly dangerous and violent in New York at that time. And unlike punk rock or basically any other form of music, if you can give it a genre, you pretty much know what it sounds like. But no wave sounds nothing even like itself. All of them sounded very different.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about what the influences were, if there were any musical artists that were influences for Teenage Jesus or the no wave movement at that time.
Well, for me, no, because I wanted to, anything that had already inspired me. First of all, I was inspired by literature, at a very early age, like Hubert Selby, Henry Miller, Desaad, Genet. And then, of course, the Stooges, early Stooges, early Bowie, T-Rex, But none of that music was to be reflected in the music that I did because I just felt there had to be something more violent. I mean, I was in a very violent city and I had a lot of rage, so I had to create a music that could most express that, and hence Teenage Jesus.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy to like the Dada art movement in that there's a lot of spontaneity and a lot of, like you said, absurdity in the music. It's very different from what was going on with, like, say, the Ramones or like Television or bands like that at the time.
Exactly. I mean, and Richard Hell, who I really loved the Voidwoods, and I was Robert Klein, who was the guitar player. I think his first fan. I just ran up to him after their first gig and pledged allegiance, and then he went on to produce some Teenage Jesus records and play on my album Queen of Siam, and then he, played with Lou Reed, actually Waves of Fear. There's a great video online. I don't know who made it. It's just a firestorm with Lou Reed's Waves of Fear, which Bob Quine has an incredible guitar solo on. He was very, very influential to me. Although my guitar playing sounds nothing like his, he somehow recognized my guitar playing, which was rather bizarre and fantastic to me. A lot of people would run in fear. I don't know why. I was only 17 with a baby. Nonetheless, Robert Klein was not afraid of me.
Yeah, his guitar playing. He's on the Blue Mask album for Lou Reed. I think I'm correct on that. Definitely one of Lou Reed's best guitar albums.
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, New York at that time. I mean, really, it's if you didn't visit it, it's hard to imagine, especially what it's become now, how burnt and destroyed. In 1977, which was basically the height of the no wave movement, we had the blackout, we had Son of Sam, the city was bankrupt. The president basically said, "Screw New York," and it was. So many buildings were burned out. It was like a purposeful burn of the Bronx and the Lower East Side to get rid of low rent artists, weirdos, minorities, anybody that had those, like I did, a $75 apartment, get them out, burn it out, because they know, as bankers and realtors do, in 30 years, which is, we try to live 30 days in advance, they live 30 years in advance. What I paid $75 for in 1977 is probably $3,000 now.
Oh yeah, it's crazy to me saying that you paid $75 for an apartment. I mean, it's just the way that the city is now, but it almost makes it difficult for a scene like CBGB's to happen now with everything being so expensive.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of alternative spaces in Brooklyn now that a lot of out jazz people like Weasel and his whole crew play at. But, the people that, and back, if we go back to the day, I mean, there were still only 10, 20, 30 people at shows. And now it's kind of gone back to that with the out jazz weirdos that exist now. And, look, when I began, I didn't think I would still be, this is 4 decades, let's get it straight. I didn't think I would be, but I'm so stubborn and so relentless, and there's so many forms of music I wanted to pervert that, and spoken word, which is still to me the most important thing, especially in a time like now. I mean, it's very important. What's interesting with spoken word is that at the same time, so I came wanting to do that in 77, but it wasn't really until I left New York and went to LA, then went to London, and then came back to New York, maybe in 82, that Jello Biafra and Henry Rollins and Exene Cervenka, all on the West Coast, and myself started curating and doing spoken word because of the political situation.
I was going to ask you about the term no wave. Is that a term that was invented by the no wave artists at that time, or is that something that was more by the music media?
Some people say it was in an interview I did for a Lowbrow Weekly that it might have come out of my mouth, but I was so no everything. It's possible. It's possible.
Right, because I've heard like David Byrne talk about new wave and say that was something that was created by like a record executive for marketing purposes. So I was just curious for that reason.
New wave could not be more different from no wave. I mean, that's polar opposite. There we go. We have the happy B-52s. And then and actually, B-52s played with Teenage Jesus once at Max's Kansas City. And if you can imagine anything more dissimilar, I beg you to tell me, because I can't.
Who opened for who on that show?
I don't know, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't care. I'll go on at 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean, actually, as I consider myself an evangelical, I just performed at a church in Brooklyn last week. And, I've always, evangelical is my new term. Anti-religious as I am. I'll be proselytizing in Cambridge at the Elks Club. Don't worry. Welcome to my church. One commandment, rebellion from false virtue. Yeah.
With the no wave movement, there's of course the famous compilation No New York, produced by Brian Eno. Although I've read a little bit that you may have not been happy with his production for the Teenage Jesus songs on that album.
Not at all. I mean, no, not at all. And hence, back to Robert Klein. I mean, the stuff he produced, he understood what the band was. I think it was at the same time Eno may have sexed himself into the hospital. And no, it was not with me. It was not with me. But I don't think Eno really was fully present. Now, I mean, Eno has, I love the first two Eno albums. I loved Roxy Music. I actually saw a fantastic interview with him recently on this British show Hard Talk, where he explains a lot of his theories. And no diss to him since, but at the time I was pretty disappointed with the production he did for Teenage Jesus. I just don't think he got it. Wasn't brittle enough.
Right, yeah, at the time, I mean, Eno was like doing lots of his ambient music. It's interesting that he even got the opportunity to produce what is now like the most famous no wave compilation.
Well, and why he wanted to do it is beyond my comprehension. So I really didn't have much to do with him because he was kind of absent, we'll just say. But actually an amazing Teenage Jesus live compilation came out last year that Weasel had put together. He's the Teenage Jesus expert. And Nicholas Char on Other People, his label, he put it out, which was very grand. I mean, I think it's like 30, maybe it's 27 songs in 34 minutes. And it's the ultimate live Teenage Jesus, if anybody can even stand 30 minutes of it. Now, remember, the sets used to be 7 to 13 minutes because once you made a point like that, it's like a hammer hit in the head. How many times do you really need to hit somebody over the head with a hammer? Well, maybe 10 or 12 times, I guess, if you want to get the job done.
What to you is the definitive Teenage Jesus compilation or album that people can check out? Because I know there's a few of them, but people debate which one is the real one.
I think it's the one that came out last year on Other People that Weasel put together, and it's just called Teenage Jesus Live. I don't remember what the years are because, I'm not sitting around listening to it, but it's on Other People label, and I think that's the definitive. Because it's Weasel went through all the live shows he could find and then remastered it to the best sound quality as he knows it should be. So
right, yeah, I mean, especially with a band like that, it's really the live experience is what you want to hear.
You got to hear the brutality.
Got to hear it.
Well, and the thing about Teenage Jesus, which I think separated us or put us somewhere else in No Wave, is it had to be extremely precise because it was so untraditional. And we recently, when the album came out last year on Other People, we did a reunion with Weasel and Tim Dahl, who plays in Retrovirus as well, and Child Abuse and various other bands, and he's actually from near Worcester. And we had to reduce Tim Dahl's genius to that of we literally take his hands to show him how not to drum, because Teenage Jesus had one drum and one snare, and I'm taking a musical genius and basically reducing him to like a monkey with cymbals. And it was really sadistic and wonderful for me to go, ha ha ha, because Tim Dahl didn't really understand Teenage Jesus, so it was even more satisfying to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every great musician should be able to reduce their playing to something like that as well.
Well, and the more people know, the harder it is for them to do something like Teenage Jesus, actually. So, I mean, it's because it doesn't make sense to a quote-unquote musician. I knew nothing about music. I only needed to do something that expressed this primal scream of urgency. So the more people know, the less likely they are to get it right. Yeah.
What are some artists currently that you think embody some of what you were trying to do back then?
Well, I always like to say, don't blame me for their crimes. A lot of the out jazz stuff has no wave tendencies, and there's just names that maybe nobody knows, but they play in New York a lot, like Michael Foster, who plays with Weasel and just did a show with me. He's a young saxophonist. Cellular Chaos, Weasel's other prog rock no wave glam band, had some no wave in it. When I see a three-piece female group that plays all tubas, I'll think I had some cultural impact. I say that jokingly, but not.
Right.
I mean, there are people out there that I think are doing something that is not, that you can't put a genre on it, like Carla Bozelick, who was in Geraldine Fibbers and her band Evangelista, which I think is really great, and all of her solo stuff I think, is amazing. I think she's doing some really incredible stuff out there. I mean, I really like this young, white, pretty perverse rapper called Dirty Farms. That's farms like pharmaceutical. It's not no wave, but actually his new album, I call it Coltrane rap, because he started playing all kinds of instruments at 9, and he's incorporated a lot more of the out jazz influence, and where this is probably going to be on, online and nowhere else. But, I think there are still some people out there. I mean, I like, this band isn't that new, but I really like A Place to Bury Strangers. I Mark Morgan, who had a band called Sightings. So there are people out there. There's some bands that Retrovirus played with a couple of months ago at Elks Club, like New England Patriots. I thought were great, and they're local bands. I don't know how do you even term what they do is, but it's somewhere south of everything.
Lydia will be in Cambridge this Thursday, the 12th, at the Elks Lodge with Brutal Measures. After this tour is over, what plans do you have for the future after this?
Well, after that tour is over, excuse me, I'm choking just thinking about it. Retrovirus do 4 shows in the States. Then I go to Italy the 20th of November to perform with Cypress Grove, and I just released an album of all cover songs with Cypress Grove. He's somebody that I did an album with called A Fistful of Desert Blues, which is kind of my more post-Roland S. Howard shotgun wedding blues side. Yes, I have that too. But what's interesting is with Cypress Grove, he did the last tour with Jeffrey Lee Pierce of the Gun Club before Jeffrey died. And he's been doing these tribute records with like Mark Lanigan and Nick Cave, Debbie Harry. I've been on all of them. And from that, we started songs for our own album, A Fistful of Desert Blues. And then I just decided to do a cover album, which just came out like 2 months ago. But what's interesting is there's been like 4 people that have died that we've covered. Greg Allman, we cover Midnight Rider, died. We cover Tom Petty Breakdown, dead. We cover, the worst band ever, which we both hated, but we had to do it. Steely Dan, do it again. 2 of them died. 2 years ago, we covered one of the worst songs ever written, Hotel California. 2 of them died. I'm like, well, we need to cover Phil Collins next, although his words will never escape my lips, I can assure you. I'm like, what is this, the curse? Or is it the blessing?
I don't know. Yeah.
Because I own these songs now. I mean, if I can own Steely Dan, we do cover Bon Jovi. He could be next. Just saying.
You heard it here first.
It's called Under the Covers, and, I've always done cover songs to pervert them. I mean, why don't we do it in the road with J.G. Thirlwell and Don't Fear the Reaper I covered That Smell by Lynyrd Skynyrd. I tend to cover bands I hated, that the songs were overplayed, to reclaim them in a sense. And also, most of these songs had really good lyrics. People just never heard that. You don't really hear them when you were driving in your car listening to AM or FM radio as a teenager, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah. I never would have thought of any of those songs being interpreted as in that way.
I think you'll be shocked. I mean, people, the Steely Dan song is always kind of my jukebox query to people. Like, nobody, no, I do them pretty traditionally. They're not that perverse, but for some reason, everybody basically hated Steely Dan. Nobody gets the song until the chorus comes up. I also cover Cracker. What? This was as weird as me covering the B-52s almost, but I cover a song by Cracker, Low, which is basically, a song about drugs and dying. The words are great. So, yeah, I just reclaimed a handful of songs, and it's pretty fun because these songs were annoying, and now they're not. And it's funny that I, the annoyer, turned songs that were annoying into something less annoying and more pleasurable. Well, I'm a contrarian. I did say contrarian. I hope we can get away with that.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to send you this so you can, have I don't know if you drive.
I do. I live in Boston right now, so I'm not driving that often right now.
Well, it's perfect car music under the covers. And
okay.
play it in the States. But anyway, you asked me what I was doing. I go to Europe with that, and then I stay there and do a retrovirus tour. And it just goes on,
Great.
It just goes. It's what I do. And thank you so much for your interest, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to me this afternoon. Good luck with the rest of the tour.
Thanks for pimping. It's hard out here for a pimp.